Ayan mga kameta, I hope this connection is a bit better. Ayan, medyo out of town tayo. Actually, medyo out of country tayo. May mga serious engagements tayo. Ukol dito sa South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. Dito tayo sa Vietnam. Pag-usapan namin ulit yung mga latest developments sa West Philippine Sea. Kaya pumunta tayo dito sa Danang, no? Danang, Vietnam. Ito yung parang version nila ng Bohol/Cebu. Ayan, kaya dito tayo mga kameta. So bago magsimula yung conference at maging seryoso yung mga usapan, sabi ko medyo makipag-catch up tayo dito at pag-usapan natin ng mga latest na nangyari sa Pilipinas. Kanina nakita natin na ibang klase, kakaiba talagang ang ano natin dyan sa Pilipinas. May awarding na, may certifications of award na dun sa task force na in charge dun sa investigations about Kapersi. Well, I mean, my understanding is that the job is far from over. Ang dami pang kailangan gawin. At not to mention, well, trabaho naman talaga nila yan. So I'm not sure that's the best optics. Just on the level of the optics, never mind on the level of whether this is justifiable or not. Ako naman, I commend the Marcos administration for doing its part in terms of making sure na yung mga top officials natin are on top of the job, no? Including, of course, the LG Secretary, Abalos, and of course, ang Justice Secretary natin na si Justice Remulla, no? Crispin Remulla. So, I'm glad naman, in fairness, may ginagawa sila ng ganyan to make sure na in charge naman talaga ang mga top officials and we move in the right direction. Especially if mga kameta, medyo malalaki yung mga pwedeng babanggain dito because, of course, yung trail na accusations, yung trail ng mga people involved potentially dito sa krimen na yan, itong assassination ni Kapersi, could lead us to very, very dark and deep places. So talaga kailangan natin ng maximum commitment from lahat ng mga opisyales, especially at high-level officials, para we make sure na yung chain of investigation, yung integridad ng investigations, everything is moving in the right direction. No? So mga kameta, yun ang para sa akin. Kasi syempre yung concern dito sa Pilipinas, minsan people are praised when they're actually just doing their job, di ba? And then trabaho talaga ng government to do the right thing. So for me, it's not the best optics na parang, especially if may sense of early triumphalism and the case is far from resolved, no? So yun yung mga sinasabi natin mga kameta. So we really hope na the investigation keeps the momentum and moves in the right direction, and nagpapasalamat din tayo of course dun sa mga kababayan natin who are constantly pushing and advocating for a proper resolution of the issue, no? So yan ang sinasabi natin mga kameta. Now, dito naman pagdating sa mga nangyari dito sa ASEAN, tapos na yung meeting nila ASEAN leaders at saka Pilipinas and US. So dumating na si Biden doon kahapon sa Cambodia, hindi ganun kalayo dito. At doon sa Cambodia naman, President Biden made very clear na he's not seeking conflict with China, but nonetheless the competition is inevitable. At together with Prime Minister Kishida ng Japan, actually they were working in terms of finding a way kung saan pwede sila mag-provide ng alternatives dito sa mga ASEAN countries para hindi sila masyadong maging dependent sa China. And I always say that's really the best way forward. Dapat ang competition dito with China is constructive. Literally constructive in a sense na may alternative tayo sa mga Belt and Road Initiative ng China, infrastructure investment ng China. Well, gladly Japan has actually been doing a very, very good job. So dapat sinasabi ko parate, mag-team up, mag-tag team ang US and Japan because US alone doesn't really have much to offer because the United States is a government that cannot command its local corporations to move in a certain direction or not, no? Kasi hindi naman sila communist system. Japan is a democracy, it's a capitalist democracy, but nonetheless, there's a long history of the government working together with major corporations, no? Mga zaibatsu, speaking of mga Japanese, at yung mga Japanese na nagko-competence. Ayun, why was I don't say, ang bilis yung isa. Bilis pala ng isa, hindi ko na yan, ha? No. Ayan tayo, ang kulit ng mga hapon na yan. No, sinasabi ko parang talaga the two have to work together. Japan and United States magka-tag team sila, potentially with participation from Korea, from India, from the European Union, Australia, other countries na like-minded din. So ang point ko parati dito is, don't put too much pressure on ASEAN in terms of making them choose. Offer ASEAN good alternatives. Good alternatives. Now, kanina actually may announcement din yung Singaporean Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Balakrishnan, calling for kind of a non-aligned neutralist movement para ma-counter itong mga disruptions sa technology, supply chains, dahil sa sanctions ng US laban sa China. Kasi sa isang banda, alam natin na may concern ng ang mga Western countries na China will use mga Western technologies, including sa yung mga computer chips, etc., to develop its own alternatives and in sometimes develop it for not the best reasons. No? Whether developing surveillance technology, developing high-tech military platforms, and not to mention, yung surveillance, sabi natin, di ba? So, what the US is now doing, especially under the Biden administration, very tough sila on China. They're imposing all of these sanctions. They're restricting access of China. Ang problema dito, ang China po, ay katrade din natin dito sa mga ASEAN countries, especially countries like Singapore, and also other partners we have, no? European partners, Australia, Japan, etc. So, what happens is that any sanctions on China is affecting everyone. You know, it's putting pressure on everyone. It's making it hard for everyone to continue having high-tech kind of supply chains operating on a sustainable level. Kaya ang point ng ASEAN ministers, especially Singaporean foreign ministers, that we have to come with the way forward kung saan hindi tayo man negatively affected ng gyera ng dalawang higante na yan. Ako naman ang stance ko dito is this. Us not making a choice between the Chinese and American is a choice in itself. And over time, it will be harder and harder for us to have that kind of neutral position because talagang pipilitin tayo ng dalawang higante na yan, ipili tayo between the two of them. And this is a very worrying situation because I also do not want to necessarily choose between the two of them overall. I think on certain issues, for instance, on the South China Sea issue, obviously mas malapit tayo dun sa mga Western partners natin. But on other issues, I think China is a partner that we have to deal with. It's a neighbor that we have to deal with. So, yun ang sinasabi natin mga kameta ngayon na the situation actually is getting more and more difficult dito para sa atin sa ASEAN. So talagang we're constantly looking for reassurances from itong mga higanteng bansa na yung kanilang banggaan ay hindi tayo maapektuhan talaga. That will not be the proverbial grass that is torn asunder by these giant elephants, making love or making war, no? So yun yung sinasabi natin. And then lastly, ito rin mga kametang sinasabi natin is that when it comes to Philippines' relations with some of the ASEAN countries, I'm relatively optimistic under President Marcos Jr. I think the problem was that under President Duterte and President Aquino, we had a kind of a clear alignment with one side against the other, no? So, for instance, with President Aquino, clearly it was a much more China-skeptic approach, which were much closer to United States and much more hostile towards China. So that made it a bit difficult for us to work with some countries like Cambodia, like Laos, even to a certain degree with some of the more key countries, core countries here in ASEAN, no? Who were not very comfortable with that kind of anti-China stance we had. Now, obviously, may meron tayong dahilan na bakit medyo confrontational tayo with China noon dahil sa nangyari sa Panatag Shoal, so, and not to mention in Ayungin later on. So I understand that, but nonetheless that made our position a little bit difficult. We look like out of the, let's say, consensus as far as ASEAN is concerned. Now, as far as President Duterte is concerned, he was naman too hostile to the West and very close to China, if not subservient to China. At least that's the perception of some of the ASEAN countries. Based on my conversations, no? So this is the tricky situation we're seeing here, mga kameta, which is, over the past 10 years or so, we had two presidents, each of them not really having a balanced relations with the major powers. No? One siding too much to one side, one siding too much to the other side. Of course, marami dyan na sinasabi tama si Duterte, marami dyan din sinasabi tama si Aquino. Okay, I'm not here to judge. You already know my stance on this issue, di ba? Hindi naman US yung bully sa West Philippines. Already, we're very clear about that. Now, with President Marcos Jr., interestingly, not only did he choose fellow ASEAN countries of Indonesia and Singapore as our first counterparts to visit, no? And in fact, during his visits to Indonesia and to Singapore, yung West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue was very important, not to mention the issue ng ASEAN centrality, which is sisiguraduhin natin na ang ASEAN ay hindi maging pitsugin, na may internal coherence, at may pagka-united front. Not the ASEAN 9, ASEAN 10, ASEAN 11, whatever. Kung papasok pa yung East Timor, kung andun pa rin Myanmar, kaya nga hindi namin alam pa, ASEAN 10 ba ngayon? May ASEAN 11 pa tayo. But anyway, if 5 or 6 key countries within ASEAN, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, if we have some sort of a common front on the South China Sea issue on dealing with China, then that in itself could be just enough, no? And then, interestingly, what we had under President Aquino was, there was an opportunity for us to develop robust kind of a pseudo-alliance with Vietnamese dun sa South China Sea. Because yes, it's true, in the 70s and 80s, we had concerns with especially North Vietnamese before, Vietnam became fully unified. Dahil kakumpindensya natin sila. And yes, it's true that Vietnam controls the most land features in the Spratlys, although they lost the paracels to China. So it's not true that overall China has less than Vietnam, but because China also controls paracels, and via Taiwan they also control, the Pratas Islands. But ibang usapan na yan. Now, the thing kasi is, panahon ni Aquino, there was a hope that we can have a common front together with Vietnam to check the Chinese. But that obviously evaporated once President Duterte came in, and President Duterte was lukewarm at best towards the Vietnamese. He was not very comfortable with dealing with them. Interestingly though, now under President Marcos, I think Marcos Jr., while we have a relatively robust and cordial interaction with our Chinese counterparts, President Marcos has very good relationship with Biden and the United States, and he's also having a very good relationship with Vietnam. And last week, dun sa meeting niya with the Vietnamese Prime Minister, there was a very interesting conversation and exchanges on how to make sure na the two countries magsisync tayo when it comes to West Philippine Sea issues, how the two countries will have more intelligence sharing, security cooperation. So this is, I think, a very, very interesting development, mga kameta, no? And for me, there's so much potential in this Philippine-Vietnam emerging alliance. Although, of course, Vietnam is smart. They're also, on their part, making sure the relationship with China is an even keel. Kaya nga yung kanilang party chief si Trong visited Xi Jinping as the first foreign leader to visit Xi Jinping after the 20th Party Congress. Given yan. But the point is, I think we share a lot in common with our Vietnamese friends. And I think there's a lot that we can do together in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, in parallel to and outside the mechanisms of ASEAN, right? Now, the other thing I want to also say here is that Vietnam is so important to the Philippines because 85% of our rice imports comes from Vietnam. And I think if President Marcos Jr., as the Agriculture Secretary, wants to do something about the food security situation in the Philippines, if he wants to improve our agricultural productivity, there are a lot we can learn from Vietnam. There's a lot that we can cooperate with Vietnam, not only in terms of buying, rice from them, not only in terms of imports, but also in terms of agricultural policy, in terms of agricultural inputs, in terms of scientific and technological cooperation. So, and to be honest, I mean, I've been visiting Vietnam over the past 10 years quite regularly, almost every year or so, and sometimes twice a year. And really, the transformation of Vietnam is mind-boggling. It's really, it has been even faster than I thought, no? It's an economy that feels like it's overheating almost, no? So this is fascinating, and I think there's so much we can learn. And Vietnam, of course, is also becoming very important because soon a lot of made here in Vietnam, no? Because as the Western countries and companies become more uncomfortable in staying in China, they are moving to Vietnam because Vietnam is close to the Pearl River Delta production network dun sa China, sa Shenzhen area. So it's much easier for them to move them. In fact, the Chinese companies are moving to Vietnam because having it made in Vietnam is much easier for them to export than having it made in China nowadays, especially in high-tech sectors. No? Not to mention the labor is cheaper here, and it's still an emerging economy, unlike China, which is a maturing industrialized power. So, ang point ko is there's just so much going on here. And lastly, I'm quite optimistic also because next year, meron din tayong ASEAN chairmanship under Indonesia. And under Indonesia, I think there'll be a lot of emphasis on economic growth and ASEAN centrality. So I'm much more optimistic about direction of ASEAN next year under Indonesia because under Cambodia, surprise, surprise, right? The issue of South China Sea was de-emphasized because Cambodia doesn't want to do anything about it because their concern is keeping their strong relationship with China. But under Indonesia, things could move in the right direction. Ayan, nandito na yung mga natin dyan, mga trawlers. Kamusta mga trollers dyan? Ayan tayo. Okay, babalik na ako. Kailangan ko na isulat yan. Thank you dahil sa inyo, alam ko na yung susulat ko. Kaya ba ako isulat, wrap up pa natin yung mga ASEAN meetings and all. Kasi nagsisimula na ngayon yung G20 Summit. So mag-meeting na si Biden at Xi Jinping. It's gonna last 4 hours. So we're gonna watch out also for the latest developments there. Thank you very much mga kameta for listening to us. Dun sa mga nagbigay ng star. Ayan si Ma'am Jocelyn Lomberio. Nakita natin sila Riz Ani, Noemi Tablate. The usual suspects. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Si Manny Chef, si Sir Michael Uy. Thank you so much kay Ma'am Fanny San Miguel. Ay yung iba, hindi pala nagbigay. Inuna ko na sila. Ayan na naman tayo. Sige mga kameta, thank you very much. Balik na ako. Mahina kasi internet sa room ko kaya hindi ako makaano dun ayan, umaariba. So yan, thank you very much guys. Yan, chill tayo dito. Ayan, chill. Yan, relax. Dito tayo mag-swing dyan. Okay, mga kameta. Talk to you soon. Very nice.